Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is the pre-application information session on the fiscal year 2019 Office on Violence Against Women Underserved program. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Kara Mahler. I've been a grant program specialist with the Office on Violence Against Women for more than 11 years, and I now manage and oversee the office's Underserved program. This webinar is an opportunity to go over the solicitation, review the program requirements, and allow for questions and answers, but this will be brief. The solicitation document contains all the detailed information regarding eligibility and application requirements and should be read in its entirety. This presentation is not a substitute for the solicitation. Please follow all the instructions as laid out in the solicitation document for fiscal year 2019. Here's an overview of the topics I plan to cover today. I plan to go through the purpose of the grant program, what's not allowed, eligibility and program requirements, award information, application elements, how to apply, some links to resources, and followed by question and answer. Toward the end, I will be joined by my colleague Michael Sterling from the Grants and Finance Division, and during that time we'll just switch speakers, so bear with us. Today's webinar is about an open solicitation. Therefore, in order to maintain fair and open competition, I will not be able to provide any type of guidance or response in terms of the design or quality of a proposal that you're suggesting, but what I can do is provide clarity or answer questions about whether something is allowed and provide examples of things we funded in the past. The Underserved program was authorized in the Violence Against Women Act of 2013. The program is authorized to develop and implement outreach strategies targeted at adult and youth victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking in underserved populations, and to provide victim services to meet the needs of those victims. Again, this grant program is authorized by statute for this project goal. The Underserved program makes grants for the sole purpose of providing or enhancing population-specific outreach and services to victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking. This includes these 5 purpose areas or strategies to meet that particular goal. These are the only things you can do under this grant program. The first one is working with governments, agencies, and organizations to develop or enhance population-specific services. Number 2 is strengthening the capacity of underserved populations to provide population-specific services. Conversely, purpose area 3 is strengthening the capacity of traditional victim service providers to provide population-specific services. So here, with number 2, is developing the capacity of a population-specific program to provide victim services for survivors, where number 3 is to develop the capacity of mainstream victim service providers to respond to the needs of the underserved population. Under purpose area number 4, grant funds can be used to enhance the criminal and civil justice system response by training them about the needs and specific issues faced by victims of these 4 crimes from underserved populations. Finally, the 5th one is working in cooperation with an underserved population to develop and implement outreach, education, prevention, and intervention about specific issues faced by victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking from underserved populations. Please remember, population-specific services means victim-centered services that address the needs of victims of these 4 crimes and that are designed primarily for and are targeted to a specific underserved population. And any of these activities proposed must be for the overall purpose of providing or enhancing population-specific outreach and service to victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and or stalking in this targeted community. As we move forward, I'm going to shorten this by saying every time I say sexual assault and domestic violence, I mean those 4 crimes, but to remember that this program is solely for the 4 crimes of domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. There are 2 priority areas included in this year's solicitation. The office has an office-wide priority to reduce violent crime against women and promote victim safety. Applicants are encouraged to propose activities that relate to purpose area 1 and 4 that we just spoke about. That is, working with federal, state, tribal, territorial, local governments and agencies to develop or enhance their services, or purpose area 4, which will be enhancing the criminal and civil justice system by training them about the issues faced by victims of these 4 crimes in the underserved populations. But please note, addressing these areas are not required but applicants are encouraged to consider these if it is appropriate for your community. Applications will not be scored any differently regardless of what's ultimately decided. The Underserved program has a priority to increase the response to victims of sexual assault, including sex trafficking. Addressing this is also optional, but proposals with at least 75% of the project's activities addressing this may be given special consideration during the review process. Examples of projects for this include developing sexual assault victim services and/or specialized services for sex trafficking victims, training law enforcement and prosecutors on sexual assault, or training criminal justice professionals and others who work with victims of domestic violence, dating violence, and sexual assault to recognize when those victims may also be victims of sex trafficking. Applications that address this must include how they will engage in outreach to victims of sexual violence and, if applicable, sex trafficking, and tailor services to address the unique needs of these victims. For this priority, applications may address sexual assault or sex trafficking or both. Now we'll talk about things that you can't do. The first will be victim safety activities. The OVW does not fund activities that jeopardize victim safety, deter or prevent physical or emotional healing for victims, or allow offenders to escape responsibility for their actions. The solicitation companion guide contains a list of these activities. There are 27 of them. I can't go over all of them, but I do want to highlight the ones most relevant to the types of projects that usually come in under the Underserved program. These kind of activities include procedures or policies that exclude victims from receiving any service or assistance based on their actual or perceived sex, age, immigration status, race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, mental health condition, physical health condition, criminal record, work in the sex industry, income or lack of income, or the age and or sex of their children. Policies or procedures that compromise the confidentiality of information and or privacy of persons receiving the services. Requiring victims to take certain actions, such as seeking a protection order or receiving counseling in order to receive other services. Failing to conduct safety planning with victims. Projects and budgets and services that fail to account for the unique needs of individuals with disabilities with limited English proficiency or who are deaf or hard of hearing, including accessibility for such individuals. Partnering with individuals or organizations that promote practices that compromise victim safety and recovery or undermine offender accountability. Training or technical assistance that does not reflect an understanding of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking, and the experience of survivors, and that fail to incorporate the experience and unique needs of underserved communities, or that include or promote practices that may re-victimize survivors. Dissemination of information, education, or prevention materials that blame the victim or focus primarily on changing victim behavior. Materials that are not tailored to the dynamics of sexual assault or domestic violence or to the specific population to be addressed by this project. So those are just 9 of the 27 list of activities that OVW has in the companion guide. Please make sure you review the whole list. Applications that propose any of these activities may receive a deduction in points during the review process or may be eliminated completely. It's just impossible to read a script and then nobody. Okay, don't worry. I'm so sorry. I'll speak slower. Okay, sorry. Here is a list of activities that are outside the scope of the Underserved program and will not be supported. These are listed and fully explained on pages 2 to 3 in the solicitation. I want to go over these in detail because they are very important to understand. Including any of these will result in significant point deductions or removal of your application from consideration altogether. The Underserved program does not fund research projects or sexual assault forensic medical examiner programs. By statute, this program is for youth and adult victims. Youth is defined by the Violence Against Women Act as 11 years and older. Grant funds cannot be used to target outreach or provide services to children under the age of 11, except in the limited context of protection order proceedings or for limited immigration matters affecting a victim's ability to maintain safety. Legal services are out of scope. Grant funds cannot be used to provide legal representation in civil or criminal matters, such as family law cases like divorce, custody, child support, housing cases, consumer law cases, etc. Grant funds can only be used to support services related to the population's experience of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking. Any training, outreach, education, prevention, and public awareness must be directly linked to providing or enhancing population-specific services for victims of these 4 crimes from the targeted underserved populations. So those are the 7 things listed in out-of-scope activities. And I just want to say that organizations that are not solely victim service providers, especially ones that are not victim service providers at all, need to be very mindful that all activities they propose and all costs associated must be about outreach and services specific to the needs of victims of sexual assault and domestic violence. If your organization serves the needs of a population in general, such as all violence against LGBT persons or immigrant needs widely, you can't use funds to simply fund your organization's regular work and say they happen to include people who are survivors. For example, hotlines, case management, support groups, outreach, training. These activities must be tailored and about sexual assault and domestic violence. And grant funds can only support the activities or a portion of the costs that are for those crimes and survivors. This is a grant program for outreach and services in communities. Nationally or regionally focused projects are out of scope. Grantees may not use grant funds to host or present at national or regional conferences. If presenting at a local event or even a statewide event relates to the targeted service area in the project, that could be allowable if it's something that directly benefits the targeted community. This is a list of unallowable activities as listed in the solicitation. Please look them over. Next, I will cover a little bit about the award information. This year, we're accepting both new and continuation applications. If you were funded in 2018, you're not eligible to apply again this year. A change from last year, please note, is that the grant award period is 36 months. Please make sure the budgets reflect for 3 years of project activity. These 3-year awards will be made for up to $450,000. That's $450,000 for the entire 3-year period, not per year. OVW expects to make up to 10 grant awards this year. Generally, the award period will start on October 1st, 2019. These are the eligible types of applicants as defined and described on pages 4 to 5 of the solicitation in detail. Eligible applicants under this program are nonprofit victim service providers and population-specific organizations that are the following. LGBT organizations, meaning an organization for which the primary purpose of that organization as a whole is to serve LGBT individuals. Religious minority organizations, meaning an organization for which the primary purpose of that organization as a whole is to serve members of a religious minority who face barriers accessing and using victim services. Deaf programs, meaning a program that is run by and for deaf individuals. The program may be a standalone deaf domestic violence or sexual violence victim service provider. It may be a general deaf services nonprofit or a deaf domestic violence, sexual violence program, which is housed inside a hearing victim service provider. The last category of eligible applicants are disability programs. This means a victim service provider or organization serving individuals with disabilities that has received 2 continuation awards under OVW's disabilities program. So for former disability grantees, this means that either the nonprofit victim service provider or the nonprofit disability program in the disability collaborative can now be the lead to apply for this program. Former disability grantees can also tweak their collaborative, but must meet the minimum requirements, which I'll talk about later, and show the continued deep partnership between mainstream victim service providers and a disability program, especially if that mainstream organization is the applicant. All applicants must be a registered 501c3 nonprofit that are one of these 4 types. There is no other type of organization that is eligible for this program. Again, this is a change from last year. Culturally specific organizations are no longer eligible to apply under this program. The Underserved program, please note the Underserved program is targeted and for population-specific organizations. It funds underserved communities to do the work. The only exception is when a deaf program is housed in a mainstream organization or when a disability grant collaborative has decided to use the mainstream victim service provider as the lead. Next, I'm going to talk about, hold on one second, I'm sorry. Next, I will talk about the required partnerships. Please make sure you review this material in detail in the solicitation. About which one? Oh, I'm sorry. I had a question and asked somebody asked me to repeat the last part. So the Underserved program is for population-specific organizations, with the exception of when a deaf program is within a mainstream organization or when a disability grant collaborative has decided that the mainstream victim service provider will be the lead. Again, going back to the 4 definitions in the solicitation and the definitions, population-specific organizations are the ones we're funding this year or every year as defined in the solicitation. Okay. Now, somebody's asked me to go over the definitions and types of eligible applicants one more time. Again, this is listed on pages 4 to 5 of the solicitation document. So again, there are LGBT organizations, which is meaning an organization for which the primary purpose of that organization as a whole is to serve LGBT individuals. The second type is religious minority organizations, meaning an organization for which the primary purpose as a whole is to serve members of a religious minority who face barriers accessing and using victim services. Deaf programs, meaning a program that is run by and for deaf individuals. It can be a standalone deaf victim service provider, a general deaf services nonprofit, or a deaf victim service program administratively housed in a hearing victim service provider agency. And the last eligible, the 4th category, are the disability programs, where the victim service provider or the organization that serves individuals with disabilities that has received 2 continuation awards under OVW's disability program can now apply. If you need more information about who's eligible or have questions about whether you think you're eligible, you can reach out to me individually. But please, again, look at the solicitation where the full definition as I read them is listed. Here we'll talk about required partnerships. Again, this slide just summarizes the more extensive information that's already listed in the solicitation. So please refer to the solicitation for the actual level of detail and specific information. I'm just summarizing here. Every application must include at least 1 formal project partner. This is a requirement. If the applicant, there are 3 types. We group them in 3 types to help people understand. The first is if the applicant has at least 3 years of demonstrated experience and expertise in providing population-specific services. They can partner with any organization of any type, but they have to partner with at least one organization. Again, if you have at least 3 years demonstrated experience in providing population-specific services, you can pick whichever type of organization you want to partner with, but must have at least one. The second is if the applicant is a population-specific organization and has less than 3 years demonstrated experience and expertise in providing population-specific services, they must partner with a victim service provider. And lastly, for the disability programs coming in, the former disability grantees who are now applying to do implementation under this program, they must include a multidisciplinary partnership comprised of, at a minimum, at least one victim service provider and at least one nonprofit organization or tribal organization serving individuals with disabilities and or deaf individuals. Nope. One partner is a minimum requirement, but more than one partner is allowed. And applications should include the organizations necessary to meet the goals of the proposed project and those needed to implement the proposed activities. Partners must be organizations and not individuals. One more thing for the first category, organizations that are not victim service providers, but are going to make the case they have the minimum experience. Since that means you're not an experienced victim service provider with a robust program of services for survivors of these crimes, you should consider whether or not you might still benefit or need to partner with a victim service provider. Or you must show strongly how you can address the full needs of these victims. But I don't want to scare anyone who's new to this work away. We fund experienced organizations in this grant program, but we also fund new communities and new collaborations to start doing this work. Organizations that have never done work with survivors of sexual assault or domestic violence have been funded. They just design their projects with close partnerships with an experienced victim service provider and focus on activities relating to starting those services. Here's the definition of population-specific services again. Review the definitions here and in the solicitation relating to eligible applicant types and partnership requirements. If the applicant is not a victim service provider and coming in as a population-specific organization, as defined by those 4 definitions of who's eligible, they must demonstrate how they meet those definitions. If they are asserting they provide population-specific services, as defined here, they must explain how and what those are and who they serve, etc. If a victim service provider is required or the applicant is coming in as one, the application must demonstrate how that organization is a victim service organization and meets this definition. It cannot simply state it. Also, applicants should consider the focus of the proposed project and the appropriate type of victim service provider. For example, if an application is proposing to address sexual assault, it should include an organization that has experience and expertise in sexual assault. If the application is proposing to address domestic violence, then that would be a domestic violence service provider. The application must clearly demonstrate all that we just discussed and how the applicant and partners meet these requirements. Simply stating an organization is one of these things will not suffice. The application must show how. Applications that do not meet these requirements will not be eligible for underserved program funding and will be removed from consideration. And these partnerships must be fully demonstrated through a signed project MOU, which we'll talk about later. Applicants must follow all the formatting requirements outlined in the solicitation, or points may be deducted. Additionally, as stated in the solicitation, the project narrative document must be no more than 20 pages in total. Grant reviewers will not read anything after page 20 for the project narrative. The reviewers will also not read any additional attachments beyond the required documents. The solicitation lays out what the application must include. Applications need to be responsive to these instructions. For this program, OVW has designated, For this program, OVW has designated the project narrative, budget, and MOU as critical. What this means is that if you are missing any of these elements, either the narrative, budget, or MOU, your application will be deemed non-responsive and will not proceed to the peer review. There are also additional attachments that must be included in your application. These are listed in the solicitation. The last page of the solicitation has a checklist of a lot of these items and probably a little more that can help you in developing your application. Please refer to the checklist and all the information in the solicitation. The solicitation also describes the elements that should be addressed in each of these documents and each section of these documents. These are bullets that must be addressed in each section. For example, the project narrative includes 3 sections: the purpose, what will be done, and who will implement. Each of these sections has different elements that must be addressed and addressed in those sections themselves. And again, that document, the narrative, with those 3 sections, the purpose, what will be done, and who will implement, has a 20-page maximum. The what will be done section of the narrative is absolutely crucial. This is where we know exactly what the grant project will do, what the grant funds will be used for. The criteria for this section is structured very differently than prior years, so please make sure you are providing information that addresses the current elements. And as a reminder, everyone has to submit a memorandum of understanding. It has to be one document developed in response to this solicitation, signed and dated by the authorized representatives of the applicant and the project partners. Multiple MOUs will not be accepted. Old MOUs will not be accepted. Documents called an MOU but are unrelated to the solicitation will also not be accepted. Again, the information as laid out in the solicitation is exactly what peer reviewers of your application will be using to assess and score your application. Specifically, did the application address all these elements? The application must also be sound and consistent. Does the application as a whole flow together? For example, why would a project that describes relevant sexual assault services for their population as the need and purpose of the project then include a domestic violence advocate or domestic violence awareness cost? Why would an application that asserts they provide domestic violence victim services, that they will provide domestic violence victim services, budget for an educator with no experience in providing services? The application must make clear what will take place, who will implement, and why the cost budget makes sense in a way that links together. All awards are made as grants. If an applicant receives an award, the funded project is bound by the provisions of this solicitation, the Solicitation Companion Guide, the DOJ Financial Guide, and all recipients must agree to comply with all legal, administrative, and national policy requirements. I strongly encourage you to review the information pertaining to these additional requirements prior to submitting your application. The information can be found in the section of the Solicitation Companion Guide called Post-Award Requirements. The standard terms and conditions for OVW grant awards are available on our website. These terms are subject to change prior to the issuance of every year's awards, but these are the ones from the current year you can see. Please make sure you review all references in the solicitation to other regulations and documents. All services supported under this program must be trauma-informed and linguistically and developmentally appropriate. Applicants and any identified partners identified in the proposal must have policies and procedures in place promoting linguistically relevant services, including the accessibility of services for participants with limited English proficiency and those with disabilities. Applicants should serve all victims and budget accordingly for those needs. My colleague Michael Sterling from our Grants and Financial Management Division will now briefly go over some financial management issues. We'll take questions at the end. I know you guys are typing them in. We're keeping track, so please know we'll get to them at the end in order.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Sterling. I'm part of the Grants Financial Management Division. The next couple slides, we're going to focus on aspects on our application that relate to documents that our financial team, the GFMD team, reviews. More specifically, we'll discuss some items that GFMD has identified from prior year applications that would help with expediting our review process. So for today, we're going to highlight certain aspects of the pre-award risk assessment and provide a link of a detailed webinar on how to develop the budget that will be included in your application. First things that we'll highlight are the items identified in the summary data sheet, which are completed by all applicants. Specifically, 3 items we would like to discuss are the nonprofit organization requirements, the single audit response, and the IRS 3-step safe harbor procedure. If you are an eligible nonprofit organization to receive underserved funding, you are required to submit a determination letter from the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, recognizing your tax-exempt status. OVW cannot make an award to any nonprofit organization that does not submit a 501c3 determination letter. Applicants are not including this as what we've seen in the past is applicants are not including this as part of their application, which further delays the GFMD's review. So please ensure that you include this application if applicable. OVW requests that all applicants provide a statement as whether they expended $750,000 or more in federal funds during their last fiscal year. If they have, then they indicate, they would indicate that they also, I do apologize for that. If they have, they also have to indicate the end of the last fiscal year. However, GFMD has seen in the past that organizations have not included the date of their last fiscal year or left out the entire statement altogether. So please ensure that you answer this question in its entirety on the summary data sheet. So another item we would like to highlight from the solicitation is specifically for nonprofit organizations. If you use the IRS 3-step safe harbor procedure to determine your executive's compensation, you must reference the additional information section that provides the required disclosure letter. We would like to highlight that there are 4 parts of the disclosure letter and that must be provided to OVW in order to comply with this requirement. The sample letter that outlines all parts of the disclosure is included in the solicitation. So please make sure that you follow the sample and provide a response for each part. The next item we would like to discuss are the financial accounting practices, which assists GFMD during their pre-award risk assessment review of all applications. Each applicant must prepare a response to all 10 questions, and each question has multiple parts. We've noticed in prior years that applicants do not always fully answer all of the parts of the question, which in turn requires GFMD to reach out to the applicant, which may delay the recommendation process. Some of the most common issues that we've encountered have been, for example, question 2, which the applicant indicates that they do indeed have internal policies, but they do not provide a brief list of the topics covered in their policies and procedures. Another example of incomplete responses includes question 3, where the applicant does not provide a brief summary of the organization's process to track expenditures, and more specifically, whether or not it tracks budgeted versus actual expenditures. So these are just a few examples, but basically, please make sure that you read each piece of each question and answer each part as fully and comprehensive as possible. On this next slide will quickly highlight some resources that are available that should be useful during your process of completing the budget. Over the last year, GFMD has worked to develop a detailed webinar presentation on how to assist applicants in developing a budget to be submitted with their OVW application. They want to help reduce any challenges that you may face with the budget and to make it clear what they look for when we review the budget. This webinar provides some insight of what OVW financial staff considers during their review. You can follow the link that is available on the presentation. The webinar also can be found under the budget information section on this webinar. Next up is a uniform guidance that can be found at 2 CFR Part 200. Then another resource is the DOJ Financial Guide, as well as the program-specific solicitation. If you need any assistance in finding any of these resources, please contact the GFMD Help Desk in the next slide. And there you have our contact information. You may call us at 888-514-8556, as well as email us at obww.gfmd@usdoj.gov. Those are the best ways to reach us if you have any questions in regards to the budget, the summary data sheet, or the financial accounting practices. And with that, I will pass it back to Karen.
I just want to follow up and encourage anybody who's going to move forward with applying to check out that webinar, Creating a Budget Training. It'll help you develop your budget in alignment with all our requirements and in the format that's most useful for OVW. Next, I'll go over how to apply. Applications are due by February 13th. I strongly encourage you to submit the application earlier and not start at the very last minute that day in case you encounter any technical difficulties. This deadline is a firm deadline. On rare occasions, and only for the circumstances described in the solicitation document, we consider late applications. To even be considered, the applicant must prove they followed the steps as described in the solicitation document. This includes showing that you registered with the System for Award Management and Grants.gov no later than January 17th, which is tomorrow. So keep that documentation showing you've obtained a DUNS number and registered with the SAM and Grants.gov system by January 17th. All applications are submitted through Grants.gov. This is a government-wide system and not managed by the Office on Violence Against Women. They have their own customer service, and we have no access to the system should anything arise. We cannot help you with issues related to this at all. Grants.gov has their own system for all government grants and their own staff that can support you. Applicants that say they missed the deadline because they were not able to get through to Grants.gov in a timely manner cannot be accepted if you don't show proof and documentation that you try to submit your application properly and, again, followed all the steps in the timeline we've outlined. The application must be complete and include all required elements. We will not follow up if there are missing documents. We cannot accept something later by email. I will talk about how the current partial government shutdown may affect some of this at the end, so please hold off on that and know that I will talk about it. Actually, go back to, okay. Back. Before I move on, I want to just go over some examples now that we've gone through everything about what you can do, how to apply. It's a lot of information. I just want to give a fuller picture. All the way back to the one about purpose areas. There. So again, this is the crux of what the program is about and what you can do. So I want to give you some examples of activities we funded in the past I hope will help better illustrate these. An example is a deaf program who's also a victim service provider who's partnered with multiple agencies that provide services to their deaf survivors, such as housing and employment. Grant activities were working with these agencies to improve their knowledge and capacity on serving deaf survivors and to make their current services more trauma-informed and deaf-friendly and appropriate. That's an example of Purpose Area 1. Another example is a Muslim organization that serves survivors of gender-based violence, partnered with a health clinic that provides primary care for sexual assault victims. And the project includes cross-trainings between the two organizations, focusing on each agency's specialty, and work to create a formalized pipeline for survivor referrals. This could be another example of Purpose Area 1, or possibly 2 and 3, but these are allowable activities. Another example is a community-based organization with the primary purpose to serve the Muslim community, who is a multi-service agency and has clients they know are victims of sexual assault or domestic violence, but this is not their expertise and they don't provide these services. They partner with a rape crisis center and a domestic violence program, who then trains their staff on working with survivors of these two crimes and help them develop some core services and provide supervision and assist them with cases if there are questions. That's an example of Purpose Area 2. An LGBT victim service provider in a major city partnered with 3 mainstream victim service providers and trained their staff regularly. An advocate from that LGBT victim service program worked 1 day a week at each of the other organizations as well, providing services to survivors and collaborating with their staff. All 4 organizations meet regularly and coordinated a seamless web for referrals. That's an example of Purpose Area 3. The next example, an LGBT youth center partnered with a sexual assault program, which helped and oversaw the LGBT program develop their own sexual assault support groups. The sexual assault center staff trained the LGBT center staff. They helped them develop the structure and content for those groups, and for the first year, they co-led them with the LGBT center staff. Conversely, the LGBT center staff conducted quarterly training on sexual assault to the sexual assault center staff about working with LGBT youth. They meet monthly, and other activities include helping the sexual assault center update materials in their office to show they are LGBT friendly, and develop pamphlets on LGBT sexual assault. And they sometimes had staff from both agencies meet with sexual assault victims together. That would be an example of Purpose Areas 2 and 3. Another example is a rape crisis center and an independent living facility developed and delivered training to transit and city police officers about responding to survivors with disabilities. That would be an example of Purpose Area 4. Another example is an Orthodox Jewish community agency partnered with a domestic violence agency, and together they trained all local law enforcement about what it means for Orthodox Jewish families to experience domestic violence and things to know, such as how they would react to police coming to the door. That's another example of Purpose Area 4. A Muslim organization that's been providing sexual assault service developed a new helpline for Muslim sexual assault survivors so they could receive 24/7 crisis support. And they developed and implemented an outreach plan to inform the public and target population about these new services, which included tabling and social media. That's an example of Purpose Area 5. Another example is a deaf victim service provider wants to develop a new hotline and work with members of the community on what that should look like and the best way to design it. Another example of Purpose Area 5. Again, these are just examples to illustrate what some of the things that are done under the purpose areas outlined here. And I think at this time we'll go back to the last slide just to go over some common errors before I start taking questions. The very last slide. Keep going, all the way down. Yeah. Again, this is just go backwards, a list of common errors that you can see. The biggest one, and I know there's going to be questions about eligibility, is whether you're eligible. Again, nonprofit victim service provider and population-specific organizations that are one of those 4 types are the only ones eligible. Again, the information is laid out in the solicitation. Again, we fund deaf programs, former disability grantees, LGBT organizations, and religious minorities. Another biggest part is incomplete applications, wrong documents, missing the required partnerships, not providing information, providing information in the wrong section and losing points, lack of demonstrating that the experience and expertise is needed can also cost you points, or proposing activities that aren't specific to you about the needs of the survivors of these 4 crimes. Again, these are just some of the errors I thought would be helpful and be mindful of you. And now, before I start, in the last slide, before I start the question and answer session, please know that if you have any questions you want to talk about in more detail, you can reach me out to me at the OVW Underserved mailbox. You can send them an email and set up a phone call. We can talk about it afterwards. I'm usually not at my desk. It's best to email to ask to set up a time to talk so we can schedule that time. But first of all, before we go into question and answers, and I have a list of them here already, I first want to say that as the solicitation states, grant awards are made subject to the availability of appropriated funds. As you know, we don't have an approved budget for the whole year. But just like in prior years, where we also didn't have an approved annual budget at this point, we move forward with our grant-making cycle. And then, as long as the budget's approved by the summer, we're able to issue our grants. Secondly, I want to acknowledge the partial government shutdown. As you can see, the Office on Violence Against Women is currently open. We've informed the public that we are open and able to operate until January 18th. If the lapse in appropriation continues longer, OVW will reassess and update its status. Because that's all the public has been told, I can't speak to any other plans or intent beyond that. Please know we are here, and if anything changes, would speak to how that impacts the process. At this time, OVW grant solicitations remain open during this lapse in appropriation, and deadlines will not be extended. But that is our office. We have Know Your Money and are able to continue fully operating right now. That is not the same for other government agencies. As stated earlier in the solicitation, all applicants must register with and maintain current registration in the System for Award Management by tomorrow. It is my understanding that this agency is not processing or is now experiencing delays processing needs due to staff being furloughed or backup of work. Again, so it's my understanding the SAM system staff, or the SAM system overall, has been affected by the partial shutdown, and there has been some issues with developing or registering for this. Please proceed with trying to register or update your information and keep all documentation to show that you've been trying to do this by the deadline of tomorrow, whether you're successful or not. Lastly, if for some reason OVW is unable to continue operating longer than they take to resolve appropriations, I encourage you, and our staff is furloughed, I encourage you to continue the application process and make sure you submit everything on time unless you hear otherwise. If the office is closed for a week but reopens the following week, for example, we most likely not adjust the deadlines. So it would not be an acceptable reason why the application is late. So again, we're doing business as usual until we hear further and are just going with the moment. So continue forward. At this time, I would like to go over some of your questions that I've received. The slides up here are available. We are recording this. We are trying to put all of our webinars for all the different OVW grant programs on our website. But again, due to some staff in DOJ and issues with the technology staff that supports us not being here, we are being either delayed or having trouble. But we will have a transcript, and I have the slides available to anybody who wants them. Second question is, can a project provide activities across one state? Again, Like I said, national and regional projects are not the focus of this. This is a grant program. We have a separate national technical assistance program that's separate than this. This particular grant program is focused on your community. If your service area will extend to a state, you'll see later on in the solicitation when it talks about the what's required under different sections, such as the narrative, you have to say why the activity or how the activity is linked to services. And maybe think about things like if you're going to another part of the state, like how effective that is and what that activity is. I mean, it'd have to be larger and more information, but technically, yes, you're allowed to go across some state or even multiple areas. It's just that we're looking at not having national or large-scale projects like that. Can a victim service provider be the lead with a partnership with a deaf program? Again, those 4 definitions are in the solicitation and cannot be altered. A deaf program that's housed within a mainstream victim service provider is eligible, but a victim service provider on its own would not be able to be the lead. A deaf program that's housed administratively within a traditional victim service provider could apply where that traditional service provider name would be the lead. But a traditional victim service provider can't just be the lead and happen to partner with a deaf program. Next question. I don't understand this. Again, it's about eligibility. Sorry, the next question is also about eligibility. I think it's clarifying about whether a domestic violence center has to be one of the 4 subtypes. And again, as the solicitation states, that all applicants must be one of these 4. If you're not sure about whether or not you qualify, again, please reach out to me separately and we can go over that. The next thing is, will multiple MOUs combined into one document be accepted? Again, that's not responsive to this solicitation. This should be one document that's combined, that responds to the solicitation, that's signed by everyone together. So you would not have an applicant with partner A have one document and an applicant with partner B have a different document. It should be one document with the applicant and partner A and B together. Is there a limit on one MOU? Please know there is no limit on the Memorandum of Understanding. This is a chance to put everything in there, and it should really mirror the application narrative and budget. Vague MOUs often don't score well. It should really describe everything that's in the elements in the solicitation, but talk about specific activities as relates to the project and the narrative. Another question is, since we need prior approval to conduct surveys, are we allowed to evaluate the project or measure outcomes by other methods? You are allowed to, I know like such things such as service satisfaction, asking your clients questions and gauging how well they're going are allowed. But if you want to get into specifics of what you're looking to do, please reach out to me. It's not my expertise, and I may have to ask or consult with our attorney. Question number 10 is if we already have the DUNS number, and I think another number from previous grants, do we still need to register? Again, these are systems outside. If they're outside me, I would say they have to be current and to double check to make sure that everything's up to date now and not assume that it's current. Oh, sorry, good question. Somebody has asked, since there are 5 purpose areas, does the project have to address all 5 or just pick a couple? The project can propose activities in as many or as little, at least 1, but they don't have to do all of them. Sometimes people do just 2 or 3. Again, it's up to you, as long as the activities that you're proposing fall under one of them. Any more questions? Oh. Again, as stated in the solicitation, OVW has determined that regional focused projects are out of scope. This is focusing as a small grant to focus on improving and providing access to services for the victims of your communities and not national and regional training projects. Somebody asked about a copy of the recorded webinar in PowerPoint. Again, I can email you the PowerPoint immediately after this. Please reach out to me. And again, we're also trying to upload a record of the webinar. And if we can get that going, hopefully on the website. But other ones have been having problems getting online because due to staff issues. Somebody asked about clarifying the limitations of legal services. In a large part, legal services are basically unallowable except limited work around protection orders and limited immigration matters that pertain to the safety of victims. Again, comprehensive legal services is not an allowable activity in this program. I had a question about a religious minority organization partnering with another religious minority organization to enhance services. As long as the applicant is either a victim service provider or can demonstrate they have at least 3 years experience providing population-specific services, they can partner with an organization of their choice, and that could definitely be another religious minority organization. What's the last one? Oh. I have another question that I'll let Michael answer, which is what do you need for documentation that attempts to register in SAM but has been unsuccessful? Again, if it's recently, I've heard this happened started a couple weeks ago, there's been issues with their staff or something with the process and we know it's going on. Please show any documentation you can have that you've reached out in time, and Michael will continue.
What Kara said basically answers it. Any type of communication, you want to keep it. So if it's email, save a copy of the email. That's probably the best bet. If you are going to send them a letter, also show proof of the time and when the letter was sent. But just any type of documentation showing that you reached out, that you submitted the registration, probably a screenshot or the confirmation page for once you submit the application to SAMS, you will want to keep a copy of it. Oh, and I think there was something here from I think somebody wanted to specify what is GFMD. It's a grant financial management division. We handle basically the financial side of everything in regards to the OVW grants. So we review the budgets. We deal with budget modifications. Like I said, the pre-award risk assessment in regards to ensuring the documentation from the financial side are done correctly, and just stuff of that nature. If you have any questions from the financial side, you have our contact information and you can reach out to us.
I got another question about former disability grantees, which now makes them eligible to apply under here. Those programs are eligible under this grant with a minimum of keeping a victim service provider and a disability service provider, but they can tweak things such as shift focus, expand, shift focus from domestic violence to sexual assault, though I would suggest considering making sure that anybody, if you don't have the experience in sexual assault, to include somebody. And they could change the collaboration somewhat. Again, the core two organizations should still be together, but the grant project does not have to be exactly what you were funded to do before. One of the questions is, what is the uniform guidance? Again, if you go through the solicitation and then reference to the financial guide and regulations that govern our grants, this is basically the federal regulation that governs all of our grantees. It's extensive, but if and when you get funded, if you've never had federal funding, we'll provide a lot of information and training, but it talks about things about, just because you have a budget item, how do you understand if it's allowable, if it's reasonable, and goes over basically the rules and regulations around spending government funding. Any other questions? Again, in the solicitation, it outlines that the registration for SAM and grants.gov and all of that should be done by January 17th, which happens to be tomorrow. Again, if you start today, at least you started, you could show that you reached out and did it. So everyone on the phone has not done that yet. Please try to do that by the end of the day. If not, keep working on it tomorrow. And again, if you experience any difficulty, document it and show that you did attempt and start off the process, and then keep trying even if you haven't made it through by tomorrow. We say those deadlines because if your application is late, you have to prove that you try to do it by then. But if your application is not late and you're able to get through to those systems later on, we're not going to not take your application. So it's a deadline that's set for people who then, it's a deadline set that if later on when you try to submit your application to us there's a problem, it will let us then consider you. But again, if you register with these systems January 20th after the deadline and you get your application in, all right, we don't care that you did it later on. We're just encouraging you to do it now, just in case. Okay, one more question? Yes, and the former disability grantees coming in that have worked with OVW, again, 3 cycles. Either the victim service provider or the disability service provider from that collaborative can now apply. It does not have to be the same lead that was under the OVW disability grant program, but it must include the victim service provider and disability service provider in the application. Which one is the applicant, which one's the partner is a decision between the two of you. The question is, would the development of evidence-based interventions be considered a research project? I'd have to know a little bit more about that. For us, like interventions is implementing services, like actual activities that are addressing and providing and doing things. But if you're talking about researching and creating it, I would need to know more information. And when we get into the topic of research, it's a little bit outside my expertise, so it'd be better if we have a one-on-one phone call, and if I need to ask a colleague to weigh in, I can ask them. So please reach out or describe the proposed idea in your email, and I can speak to whether or not it's allowable. I think at this point we have to wrap up. If you have any more questions, please reach out to ovw.underserved@usdoj.gov. If you're on this call, that means I emailed you the information about this webinar. It means I also emailed you a link to our solicitation that I kept referring to. Everything I discussed is actually described in more detail in that document, and that document provides more information. So I only highlighted some things. Please refer to the solicitation for what you need to do and what's required, and then reach out to me if you have any questions. And I hope this is helpful. And thank you, everyone, for joining.